Hey everybody, we're on live once again on social media. Hopefully you're on my Facebook. I don't know if you're on YouTube right now. Wherever you are, just welcome to an interview that I'm calling the Cross-Eyed Culture. Listen, you're going to want to invite people. Share this right now before you even get into this interview, because we have a special guest today. And tell your friends, maybe without giving out too much information, it's like $1 million prize. You're about to be blessed with like $1 million reward for being on this special episode, Cross-Eyed Culture. So while you're doing that, just letting you know, here on the Cross-Eyed Culture, the reason why it's even called that is because I just thought it was a nifty way of communicating something. Those who are Christians or believers, the way we see the world, or at least we should see the things around us, is through the filter of the cross. We understand the world. We have the mindset of Jesus, and we see the world through the filter of the cross. So that's the eyes of the cross. However, when the culture or the world looks at us, oftentimes they look at us as though we are cross-eyed. Sometimes we're just not seeing eye to eye. Well, I call this cross-eyed culture because I want to talk to those who've been in the culture, in the world, if you will, in the entertainment industry. They had fame that was thrust upon them. They had all the things that you can think of that would be a life that you would say, man, that's the kind of life I would love to live. And we look up to those people. However, there was something that happened in their life that they started to see things differently. So we want to learn from them. I want to ask some questions. Hopefully it's questions that you would ask. And I believe they have something to say that will help us out. So please take a moment right now, share this with somebody. You stay tuned as well. And people, as they start coming on, they're going to be included in this wonderful conversation or interview that I'm having with my guest today. So without further ado, let me tell you who I have on with me today. I have with me Ted DiBiase. Some of you, hopefully that's ringing a bell. And he wrestled as the $1 Million Man. Do you get it now? And he has been named one of the best technical wrestlers and the greatest villains. I'm trying to think. I think I remembered him more as a villain than I did as a technical technical wrestler, yes. But as far as like a hero, I don't know if I ever saw him as I think he was the baby face. I think that was the name. We'll find out when we talk to him. But the greatest villain in pro wrestling history. He is presently a minister of the gospel, along as well as a family man. And let's ask him, what else would we like people to know him by? So welcome, Ted.
It's great to be with you, Pastor. Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you. Now, I don't know if you got to hear any of the intro while you were in backstage. You got to hear me a little bit?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Anything I need to correct there?
No. I mean, that's pretty good.
Were you actually, like, what did they call it? A baby face or something like that?
Well, yeah. In wrestling terminology, if you're a good guy, if you're one of the good guys, the fan favorites, you're a baby face. And if you're the bad guy, you're the heel. And so when I started my career, before I was ever in the WWF, actually I went to the WWF once before. But anyway, I started in 1975. I was 21 years old. And for the first few years of my career, I was a babyface. I was a good guy. Yeah. And it's just, it's kind of the culture of wrestling and the real art form of wrestling is improv. I mean, it's a lot different today, but most of the time when we got in the ring, you're telling a story. And of course, it's the story of good versus evil. And a lot of times we would get in these programs. So two guys something would happen and the bad guy would take advantage of the good guy. And then, then they would have that would happen on TV, and then they would go to the arena and have a match. And somehow the bad guy would underhandedly win again, and they would keep going and they would have another type of a match. And, it would culminate in like a cage match or a strap match or something like that. But ultimately the good guy would win. But in the body of the match, the only thing we ever knew when we stepped in the ring was exactly how that match was going to end. We call it the finish because it's like a soap opera. It's like the finish determines, it's like that's the hook. It's like, oh my gosh, my guy didn't win tonight, but he'll get him next week. And that's the hook to
Right.
get him back. So that's the real art form of wrestling. The story is the match.
Yeah.
And that's not true so much anymore. There's not that many people that have that kind of ring skill anymore, but it's a lot more talking these days, and it's a bigger soap opera than it is a wrestling show now.
You're
Anyway,
right.
my
Yeah, no.
opinion.
No, this is great. I mean,
Yeah.
you're already schooling us and you're taking me back. I mean, I don't watch it as often now than I once did. But man, I can't believe I'm here talking to you, the $1 million man. It was you're one of those guys that, they love to hate, but was is exciting when he was in the ring. And so that's who you were. So how did you even get into wrestling? What was your pathway to get into wrestling and then even being able to make it to the WWF and those other places?
Well, I grew up loving wrestling because well, my biological parents divorced when I was 2 years old, and when I was 5, my mother remarried, and she married Mike DiBiase. Mike DiBiase was the son of Italian immigrants, born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska, and was a professional wrestler. But Mike was not just a professional wrestler; he was an amateur wrestler. He wrestled, and he wrestled while he was in the Navy. And while he was in the Navy, he won the AAU National Heavyweight Wrestling title. And then when he got out of the Navy, right after World War II, he went to Nebraska, the University of Nebraska. And in Nebraska, he lettered, like they said, like 8 times. So, like 4 years in wrestling, 4 in football, and 3 years in a row, he was a conference heavyweight wrestling champion. So a big story there. But as far as coming into my life, Italians are all about family. And I
Yeah.
know Puerto Ricans are too.
Yes, we are.
And family's everything. And so I came into this family, and he was a great dad, and he instilled in me a lot of, things that I try to pass on to my kids and kids when I do school assemblies, and he would say to me, he said, son, he said, don't follow the crowd. 90% of the time, the crowd's not doing what you should be doing. He said, you know what? He said, he said, be a leader, not a follower. And he said, and yet you follow Jesus. And, that's the first time I went to church. Now, like most Italians, my dad was Roman Catholic. And so I grew up in Catholicism when I was young, award-winning altar boy. I was the guy who showed up when there was 4 feet of snow on the ground in Omaha. It's the 6 o'clock mass, and nobody else in the church but the priest and me.
Wow.
So I had what I call a strong childlike faith in God when I was young. My dad had a heart attack and died at a young age, 45 years old, in a ring during a match.
Oh, wow.
And I ended up moving back to Southern Arizona, where my mother's parents had moved. My grandmother, they actually were from Nebraska too, but they moved to Arizona because my grandmother had rheumatoid arthritis, and she ran a truck stop there. And I finished high school in this little town in Southern Arizona with like 3 traffic lights. But the things that my father had instilled in me as a young man, I carried with me. And I was the first kid to graduate from this little high school in Arizona, in this little town, Wilcox, with a scholarship to play Division I college football. I had signed with Arizona, ended up going to a place called West Texas State up in the panhandle of Texas, where another famous wrestling family, the Funk family, Dory Funk Sr., Dory Funk Jr., Terry Funk. And Terry's kind of he was always been a mentor to me. But that was my avenue anyway, my avenue into wrestling. I went there and I played 3 years of college football. And then I went to what was called Mid-South Wrestling. This was back in the regional days of wrestling before the WWF took off and just became nationwide and everything else went away. Regional wrestling. And so I I went to Atlanta, and then I got over really well in Atlanta, and then I came back here in Mississippi when I married my wife Melanie, and I've been here now for 35 years. And it was from here in 1987 that I left and went, and I got the break to go to the WWF and become this unbelievable character, the Million Dollar Man. And
Now that's the question I want to ask
yeah,
next.
yeah.
Like, so now you're there. Fast forward a little bit, you're there. Did you pick out the character you're going to play, or is it some kind of think tank of people that come up with that? Like, how did you even come up with that character?
Well, my character as a heel was always I always carried myself, like it was kind of like body language is a lot, like you look at people and it's like I would look at people like they were garbage. I was a bad guy, right?
Right.
And so and of course I would talk real tough. I was a bully. I
Yeah.
talked tough. I could go, but I would talk tough until somebody stood up to me and told me to keep my mouth shut, and then I'd become the coward. And you never get tired of seeing that guy get his rear end kicked, So
Uh-huh.
that was the type of heel I was. So Vince McMahon saw that, and he said, "I've got this idea." He said, he says, "You're going to be probably one of my best heels." He said, because he says everybody hates, everybody hates a bully, but you're going to bully people with your wealth. We're going to call you the Million Dollar Man. And so he gave me the character, but he
Gotcha.
gave me the character based on what I think he already saw as the way I carried myself as a heel. So,
That is something. Now, how would you describe the wrestling business side of things? You were saying a little bit of there was more of a story arc and what have you that was being done before, and now it's more like a soap opera. But the business side of things, what's the difference between maybe what it looked like then and what you kind of like what it's become?
well, back when I first started, it was regional, and regional was just we'd go to what you call a territory. Like for example, Georgia Championship Wrestling was the state of Georgia. I mean, all the towns we wrestled in were in Georgia. Florida Championship Wrestling. Now, Mid South Wrestling, where I started, was 4 states. It was all of Louisiana, Mississippi, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. Big territory, but still, it was regional. And you would wrestle in a region for a year or so, and maybe go on to another region where nobody knew you, and then you would wrestle there for a while, and maybe you go back to that place. The next time you go back to that place, you've been gone a while, so people may know you, but you're new again. That was the type of atmosphere. But when Vince took the wrestling business nationally, um, everything changed. And because it used to be that professional wrestling was we would tape our TV shows in little studios. I mean, the audience back then was like 2 sides of the ring. It's
Hmm.
like a two camera shot. You had bleachers with the fans on this side and this side, and that was it. And then when Vince started going big time, and he started doing all of his televisions from Coliseums, and he just took wrestling to a whole new level. I mean, it's like instead of going everywhere by car, and that's wrestlers all used to buy big 4-door cars because you were going to be one week you're going to be driving and carrying 3 guys with you, and the next week another guy drive his car, and so you wouldn't just put all the miles on your car because you were driving your own vehicles, and it was but then it went to with Vince, it became Learjets and limousines, and literally now it was Learjet, not so much Learjets, but I mean we flew everywhere
Mm.
uh, in the WWF, and then it was not only national, and we ended up going international. We started going to Europe and around the world. But my character, not everybody flew first class. Hulk Hogan first flew first class. Andre the Giant, but Andre was 7 feet 4 inches tall, weighed 450 pounds. He couldn't coach anyway.
Right.
And but nobody got that kind of treatment. And then I had the limousines every time I got off the plane, and that was all for the fans to project my character.
Right.
And now the funny thing is, I would go to the arenas, and kids at the arenas, they would be throwing rocks at me and calling me names, and then after the show, the same kids would be in the lobby of the hotel with an autograph pad.
Right. I want to get your
You know,
autograph. Exactly.
because and that's the other thing Vince did, is that he just announced to the world. He said, "Look, wrestling is sports entertainment. It always has been. That's okay. We're good." And so he did take it to a whole different level. And
Wow.
it was kind of like, we started traveling, and I always say like rock stars, because that's how rock stars do. They do an album and they go on tour. They go on tour and they go all over the country and around the world with their latest album and their newest hits. And that's what we were basically doing.
I was doing, I didn't tell you this, but I found on this app, it was a podcast called Business Wars. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's actually one of the episodes. They have a series with the WWF, and the one that they were against. What was the other federation? There was the was it WCW?
WCW.
WCW.
Yeah.
So it's WWF versus WCW, and they just talked about the whole drama within the business of that. So it's an interesting listen. I would be interested in you listening to it and give some feedback whether you knew those things were happening behind the scenes or not. But yeah, money drives a lot of decisions now. Vince McMahon, he's putting it on the map in just a whole new way. It's being presented to the world. There's a business, a viable business to it. But I also know they were probably pushing the envelope when it came to trying more dangerous stunts or skits, I would imagine, because of the eyeballs that gets and the intrigue, right? So the greater the danger, the more the viewers, which increases the stock price of the, maybe wrestling or the viewership. Were you finding that to be the case, that there was more dangerous things that was pushing the envelope because of that?
Well, I don't think so much dangerous things in terms of stunts, but what Vince did is, wrestling, when I started in it, when I grew up in it, was what I would call a pretty blue collar crowd, entertainment. You weren't going to see a lot of polo shirts and khaki pants at the wrestling matches, kind of a rough crowd. And Vince took it and basically dressed it up. He put all the characters in colorful costumes, gave all of us like entrance music. He's just like me. I was a bad guy, but I walked to the ring, in a tearaway suit that had, a big dollar sign on the back and dollar signs on my lapels, and he made it really, initially, he made it family entertainment, and he targeted it. He pointed it towards kids. And so like Hulk Hogan was the ultimate hero, and I ended up being one of the ultimate villains. And so it's like, every hero's got to have a villain to go against. And I was one of the villains. So it wasn't so much that. And it's just evolved over the years. And I don't know how to explain it. I mean, the way that I learned our craft was they just, they throw you out there. They take you in the ring. They show you the basics in terms of how to control your body, how to take falls and what have you, the mechanics of it. But then the storytelling is, when I was a young wrestler, I was always in the ring with somebody who had experience, and they called the match. They would actually tell me what to do.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know why it is that way, but most of the time, the bad guy, the heel in the match, he's calling the match. He's calling the shots, and that's how I learned. But as I learned and I became gifted in my own way, then I eventually became the heel, to where I was leading the match, so to speak. And that's the thing, the organic thing about wrestling. It's hard to explain. It's like Vince looked at me one day and he said, "You remind me of Ray Stevens, who was a great wrestler." And I said, "How's that?" He says, "Well, if you ever asked Ray why he did anything at any particular time in a match, he couldn't really explain it to you." And I said, "That's right, Vince." I said, "We call it working. It's the art of improv. It's you feel the crowd,
Mm.
and you learn this thing instinctively when it's time to do something and not to do something. And it's like, if you try to have the same match with a guy in two different towns, the fans aren't always going to respond the way you think they're going to.
Okay.
And if they don't, then you have to be able to think on your feet
Mm.
and change it to get their attention. And that's the best way I can explain it. But so as my era of wrestlers disappeared, the newer guys coming into the business, didn't actually get that opportunity. They were brought in a different way. And so now a lot of wrestling matches are totally from bell to bell. They're mapped out. I couldn't do that. I personally couldn't do that. It's foreign to me.
It's too much to
And,
remember.
and yeah. And a lot of fans have said it too. They say, it seems like so much of the story now is backstage and like 20-minute promos in the middle of the ring, and it's not so much the wrestling match anymore. And I have to agree with them.
Yeah.
But but the lifestyle, that's the thing, and um,
Yeah.
it's kind of like it became um, when you're gone that much from home. It's kind of like it's one thing to get in trouble um, when you go looking for trouble, but when you're a celebrity, you don't have to look for trouble.
Mm.
Trouble will come literally knock on your door. I mean, it's hard to explain that too. Uh, but that's part of my story. I mean, I got all caught up in that. Um, and
Yeah.
you hear stories about celebrities all the time. Pick up any tabloid magazine and you're reading about somebody that's become a drug addict or an alcoholic, and they've been married and divorced and multiple relationships and what have you. And my story is somewhat similar. Vince McMahon gave me this incredible opportunity. And so I'm literally traveling the world in Learjets and limousines, being treated like a rock star. And um, I love my family more than I love life. But, it's like what people don't see is, they see you in a coliseum or a big building, and they see all this crowd looking at you. And, for me, the boos were like they're cheering you on or they're booing you out of the building. Of course, that's what I wanted to hear because that was my job.
Yep.
But what the fans don't see is like after that show, when you go back to a hotel room, and whether you're 50 miles or 5,000 miles away from your family, you're sitting in an empty hotel room night after night after night with four walls and a TV. And that becomes a very old place quick. And so, you saunter down to the bar and you have a beer and then you have two. Sometimes that's how guys develop alcoholism, or you get hurt. And that's an old saying, the show must go on. And a lot of times you wrestled hurt because you had to, especially if you're a headliner, because
Mm.
you're more responsible and everybody else is dependent on your ability to draw the crowd.
Yeah.
And so that's how a lot of guys end up in drug addiction and what have you. But for me, I did some drinking and things like that, partying. But for me, I guess the downfall for me was women, and that's my story. It's not pretty. It never is. But God has a way of giving you just enough rope to hang yourself,
Wow.
and and then when He does, His timing is always perfect.
Mm.
And I was at the height of my career. I was as famous as I was ever going to be. And I called home actually the day after a WrestleMania, and my wife confronted me with adultery.
Mm.
And pastor, in a fraction of a second, I remember thinking, you idiot. The realization that I had put at risk the best thing in my life, a woman that I truly loved, not to mention the future, the stability, and the peace of mind of my children.
Mm.
I had gambled all of that for the sake of having a good time and stroking my ego. And I mean, it just literally, I mean, I said, I don't want to talk about it on the phone. I'll be on the next plane home. And she said, no, you won't. You don't live here anymore. Click.
Wow.
And the guy I called is a pastor who I met in Baton Rouge in 1982. I mean, January of 82, right after Melanie and I had been married. And he was a youth minister then. His name is Hal Santos. He's half Puerto Rican, and his mother's, you know, not. Anyway, um, Hal and I, he said, I got one question for you, Ted. He said, I've seen you on regional television and everything. He says, do you know Jesus? Now, this is way before the WWF. I said, let's sit down and talk. So I sat down and shared a little bit of my story with Hal. Hal Santos stayed in contact with me for the next 10 years. I mean, he moved away from Louisiana and went up to as a youth minister to a church in Fairview Heights, Illinois, which is near St. Louis. And he was a youth minister there. When that pastor retired, he put Hal in there as the senior pastor. And he's been there 35 years. Amazing. And but Hal just stayed in contact with me, you know, and I look back at it and I realize Hal didn't beat me up with religious questions when we talked. Are you doing this, Ted? Are you doing that, Ted? When I look back at it, I realized that what Hal did was show me the unconditional love of Jesus Christ. He was just a friend. And he always let me know that he was praying for me. But in my darkest hour, you know, and I had walked the aisle. Melanie and I moved to Mississippi 35 years ago. Her parents moved here. They retired here. I met her in Atlanta. And, you know, I walked the aisle, you know, in the church that I still go to, and said the sinner's prayer, was under conviction, and yet I was still messing up. But that all changed when this all came to light. And I didn't call my pastor at home. I called Hal. And Hal made arrangements for Melanie and I to fly to St. Louis. And on the way to face my wife, who had arrived ahead of me, Hal said, Ted, he said, Jesus said the truth had set you free. He says, if you'll trust him today like you did when you were a kid, when your dad died and your mom started drinking, he said, he'll forgive you. He'll restore you. He said, you see, you know, he never left you. You left him. And all these years he's been trying to draw you back. And he says, there's forgiveness, Ted. There's restoration, but there's also consequences to the choices you've made. He says, and one of those consequences may be your marriage. He says, but if you'll trust Jesus through the storm you're going to go through, you're going to come out on this storm, and you have to trust me. You're going to come out of the storm on the other side with a peace in your life. The Bible says surpasses all understanding. You won't be able to explain it, but you'll have it. And that was the hardest day of my life, to face my wife and come totally clean. And I've never felt so empty. And but at the same time, it was the greatest day of my life, because it was the day I truly said, okay, Lord, I keep doing this my way, and I keep messing it up. Come on board the ship of my life and take the helm. I'm going to go wherever you send me. And I said, if that means I quit wrestling, I don't care what it means. If I have to lose my family, that's what I deserve. But it's funny. I went with Hal on this trip to a youth conference he was taking his kids to up in Chicago. It's every year. It's like the weekend leading into Easter. And I think it's like from the middle of the week, into Saturday, and then everybody goes home, so they'll be home for Easter Sunday. And the special speaker there was a guy named Reggie Dabbs. Have you ever heard of Reggie?
No.
Reggie's a great speaker, big black guy with a big heart, and you can imagine now. And on the way up there, Hal handed me this little book by Dr. Edwin Lewis Cole, Maximized Manhood.
Yep.
And that book talked about the strength of a man is not in his biceps or his bank account. His strength is in his character and his integrity. The real man is only as good as his word, and his word's no good, he's worthless. And man, I'm wanting to crawl under a rock, And so when I got in there and I walked into this building, and it's all teenagers, and everybody in that room recognized me.
How old were you at that point?
I was 38 years old.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
And I was at the peak of I had highlighted blonde hair back then, not totally blonde, but it's blonde streaks and everything. Mm-hmm. I stuck out like a sore thumb. But what better place for God to put me to see how I would respond?
Wow.
And when Reggie Dabbs gave the invitation that day, I was the first one. I almost ran down the aisle. And I didn't just go forward, Pastor. I fell to my knees. I put my nose in the carpet, and I cried like a baby. And I didn't care what a soul in that room thought then, and I haven't cared since. It was life-changing. And I even remember the teenagers, the kids came up, and they actually picked me up off my face, and they were crying, and I was crying, and they were hugging my neck. And it's a moment in my life I'll never forget. But there was one more miracle in the house. Melanie, my wife, came to me and she said, Ted, she said, I'm not going to make you a promise I can't keep. I don't know if I'm strong enough to do this. She goes, you've broken my heart. And she says, but I serve a God of restoration, not divorce. And I said, because I want to be obedient. And that's the word she used. I want to be obedient to the still small voice in my heart right now that says, give him another chance. She said, all I'll tell you is I'll try. Now, I want you to know, based on the confession I made, I was convinced walking in there that I'd lost it.
Wow.
There's no way that my wife could stay with me, and she did. And today, our relationship is far greater, in every conceivable way. It's Melanie and I, she's my best friend. And our relationship is grounded in our mutual relationship with Christ.
That's it.
But I never envisioned in my wildest dream that would go from, I was 38 years old, and that was in 1992. And it was actually a couple of years before, and Hal said this, he said, Ted, he says, now there's going to be some pastors find out that you become a Christian, and with all the best intentions, they're going to want to have you come to their church and share your story. And he says, I just want to caution you. He said, you're a baby Christian. He said, you know what babies do sometimes? And I said, what's that? He said, sometimes they poop their pants. And I said, I get it. I understand. I said, not until you tell me I can go, will I go. And so I started going out when I was about 40. Little by little, it was like a snowball rolling downhill. Mm-hmm. And then in the year 2000, I walked away from wrestling as a vocation in life totally and surrendered to full-time evangelism. And that's what I've done with my life ever since. And initially, I spent a lot of time speaking to teenagers. That was the demographic of the wrestling fans then. And of course, those teenagers, that they grew up to be men as I get older, and I find myself doing a lot of men events now.
There you go.
Did some Promise Keepers Canada. Mm-hmm. I did meetings with them for like about 8 years, and that's just every door that God opens, I try to go through.
Well, what a turnaround. I want to get into a little bit of the message that you carry, but it just going to that moment where you came to that altar call. It was a true surrender. Like, you were truly surrendering your life. There's some people who kind of do that half-heartedly. They're more emotional about what they've done, then they're willing to surrender what it is that they've done to Jesus.
Yeah.
So that was like really authentic, and you even speak to it because you were even willing to surrender your marriage. And it was in that place, like Abraham surrendering Isaac, that God ends up giving it all back.
Yeah.
He restores it all. So
Amen.
it's a beautiful, beautiful
Amen.
picture of what that
Amen.
is. And the fact that, it was around kids, I was like, listen, I was like, if that happened nowadays, that would have been caught on social media. There would have been a lot of people taking pictures of
Yeah.
that.
Oh yeah.
That would have been a way different experience. But they were just there with you. They were in that moment with you, which is another
Yeah.
beautiful moment of just encountering
Yeah.
Jesus like that with them. I just commend Hal. I
Yeah.
think about how he reached out to you, and he was somebody that was more interested in your soul than your money or your fame.
Yeah.
And I think that, for those people who are not maybe there where they have that platform, they can identify with how, like, they have an opportunity to look around them, and whoever God puts in front of them, they need to see them beyond their platform or
Yeah.
their belt or their prestige and see them as a soul. Uh, what would you say to, just like maybe just those common persons that would be how like people who are just maybe in the same gym as you or the same gym as somebody else that might have, seeing that they have more fame or more prestige, what would you encourage them to pay attention to the opportunity of that soul that's in front of them?
Well, that's just it. When you look through spiritual eyes, you don't look at people the same way. Because if you've become a genuine follower of Christ and a disciple, so to speak, then that's what you're most interested in. That it is not who they are or what they are in the world today, but you're interested in their soul. And so and again, Hal has been. Hal is such he's the greatest example. I mean, we go on vacations together. We'll go on cruises and stuff like that together. And I mean, every time I turn the corner, I'm not constantly with him, but if we go somewhere and we get in a hot tub or something, Hal is going to strike up a conversation. He's going to start talking to somebody. It's just in his DNA, and that's what it is. It's um, you got to look through people with a whole different lens. Look
Yeah.
at people through a whole different lens. It's kind of like people that you see that you might say that you wouldn't. Like, I don't know, either that they have an attitude or they
Right.
just don't just seem right. Whatever. And and you got to try to look beyond that and go, okay, that guy's kind of a grouch or he's whatever, but there's something that's happened in his life that's made him that way.
Yeah. And
You know,
what about you? I want to ask this question because how was a person that you embrace as a discipler, but even to be a person, were you older than him as well?
I'm just slightly older than him.
Okay.
Yeah.
But just the fact that, you're just in a different career, you got the spotlight on you and everything. The fact that you can humble yourself to be discipled by him, where did that come from that you almost intuitively knew that you needed to make yourself coachable or a kind of a disciple to somebody who maybe was in a different station in life than you?
Well, and it's just, I mean, it's all a God thing. I mean, I looked at that. I said, "There's no other way that this could have all come together." And the fact that Hal would, and again, like I said, I didn't call my pastor. Now, my pastor at home's a great guy, but what I didn't have the relationship with my own pastor that I had with Hal.
Hmm.
And that's the thing is that now if Hal had in the time where we knew each other for over those 10 years, if every time I talked to Hal if he'd have been blistering me with, are you going to church, are you doing this, are you doing that, I might have got tired of hearing it. But that's not what he did. He just loved on me. He was just a friend. And so I looked forward to seeing him. I looked forward to seeing his wife. I mean, he and his wife became friends to Melanie and I, and that's why I called him. That's why it was him that I called, because I knew Hal's heart, and I knew that he would do everything he could to help me, and he did, and still does. I mean, he's my closest friend today. I can't hear you.
Sorry, I was saying that you went from the $1 million man to the $1 million disciple. Like that's like exactly the kind of disciple you would want, a person who's just kind of open to learning and willing to kind of just be a friend and reach out and initiate themselves with those other individuals that they're trusting with, guiding them in
Right.
their faith. So that's amazing. Now, I want to get into your message. You shared how you go around and now you're speaking and you're ministering, and you've given up kind of that career to really focus in on just the kingdom and doing things for Jesus. One of your main messages that you mentioned is legend versus legacy.
Right.
Maybe without giving the whole message, what's
Yeah.
the difference between the two for you, that maybe the listener can be able to distinguish, what that would mean for them?
Okay. Oftentimes, today I'm referred to in the wrestling industry as a living legend, like one of the legendary wrestlers, and I said, you know what, it's nice to be recognized for that, but when I started out, before I had the relationship with God that I have today, that would meant everything to me. That's what I was striving to be, and that's all about me.
Yeah, personal.
And basically, I tell people I lived to become a legend in my career, only to regret it.
Mm.
uh, uh, legend's all about self. Legend is all about all the accolades of whether you're a wrestler, a fighter, a football player, a taxi cab driver. I mean, you want to be the best. You want to be recognized, and there's nothing wrong. And I say this all. There's nothing wrong with striving to be the best. The
Hmm.
difference is this: to the glory of God,
Yeah.
not to the glory of self. It's like, now I tell people all the time, the only thing that the fame that I believe God's allowed me to have, that God allowed me to get to, the only thing it means to me today, it's the vehicle by which I can point people to Him. So
Yeah.
when they look at me, they're going to see me pointing to Him. It ain't about me; it's about Him.
Hmm.
And that's legacy. Legacy is, I think about it as my children grow up now, and I thought about this one day. What if that hadn't worked out? What if my wife had divorced me, and what if I had just continued to chase, my my legend?
Mm.
What would my kids think of me today?
Mm.
What kind of impression would I have made on them and in their lives? And I think about this. One day I'm going to die, and my boys, God willing, they're all still alive, and they're gonna stand over my corpse, my casket, and they're going to talk about their dad. What are they going to say?
Mm.
What is the legacy that I'm leaving? I mean, I started a ministry, and the ministry basically was a ministry of evangelism, and it's pretty much, that's still what it is. We've done a few other things, but and I named that ministry Heart of David,
Mm. Okay.
because I looked at the life of David and went, wow, here's a guy who became king. Here's a guy who was ordained by God to be king. Yeah, man, look at the most dysfunctional family in the entire Bible. But what was it? Why did God say David is a man after my own heart? And here's what I tell men all the time. I said, because here's what God knew about David. In spite of his humanity, in spite of his flesh, and in spite of his failures, David never quit getting up.
Hmm.
At David's core, he loved his God.
Hmm.
And he lived his life in spite of his failures to please God. And so I said, that's it. You know what? We're all sinners, and when the day we take our last breath, we're still sinners. It's by the grace of God alone, and Jesus's death on the cross that we have any hope at all. You know, but keep getting up.
Yeah.
You know, legacy. You know, that's what it is. You know, what are you gonna leave? It's kind of like one of the scriptures, and I'm not sure which, where Jesus said, "Store for yourself treasure in heaven, where neither rust nor moth break it and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." So that's where I had to do the self-exam. Where's my treasure? You know, before it was all about the legend. It was all about, man, look at me, look at me, look at me. I'm a star, man. Look at me, look how great I am.
Yeah.
You know, that ain't storing up anything in heaven.
Right.
But God, when God really humbled me, He humbled me. And I just said, you know what, Jesus, I don't want anything else anymore except your will in my life.
Amazing.
And I know, like David, I'm just a man, and there's going to be times that I screw up. I said, but know this, Lord, I ain't never going to quit getting up. I'm never going to quit on you if you won't quit on me. And that's legacy. And legacy is it's kind of like there's a TV series that my wife and I are watching now that it's called Yellowstone.
Okay.
And it's about this big ranching family, and I'm trying to think of the guy's name, Kevin Costner. He's the producer, and he's the head guy of this ranch, and the whole story is about, you know, his power and his land and all this stuff, you know, and how it's affecting, you know, he's got a daughter and he's got kids, and it's a really great, it's enjoyable to watch, but at the same time, I watch that, and, you know, it's like I'm waiting for the time when and maybe it won't come, where Costner quits being the big cattle guy, the big rancher who's dead set on keeping all of his land and not letting anybody, knock him off as king of the hill.
Yeah,
And
you know it's coming. Yeah.
yeah,
It's a
so
humbling moment.
what kind of legacy, again, what kind of legacy and I ask men that all the time, what legacy are you leaving? And that's another thing I tell men all the time. I said, you know the best thing you can do for your children? And they say, what? And I said, love their mother.
That's right.
Love their mother, and be a servant husband.
Yep.
Serve your wife. You don't want to be that guy, that macho guy that comes in and, wants the paper and kicks his shoes off and hits the recliner.
And grabs the remote.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I tell people the same thing. I said, sometimes us as fathers feel real beat up about how, what's happening with our children, and are we really qualified? I said, listen, if you can do anything, love your wife well. And that's like half of what it takes to bring up at least children that saw Jesus through their father, through the way they served and loved their wife. So, and their mother. That's a powerful statement. Now I have this last question I want to ask you, and you can take your time with it. So, but just looking back at our interview, you talked about where you've come from and the father figure in your life that was able to kind of get you on this path of wrestling, and all the bumps in the road that came with that, with your marriage and in your career. And now you're this soul winning person after surrendering your heart to Jesus, family man, doing wonderful things like the heart of David for people and speaking at different places so other people can avoid your mistakes, but even just hear the goodness of God. So what do you hope will be your legacy after it's all said and done? We know we, there's some things we all hope for, right? And there's things that we know that they'll say because it's true to their experience with our children and our family. But if you were to be there as you're there on that day, but in the spirit, what do you hope will be part of the things that they will say about you?
Well, that I was a good and kind man. That I was uh, a person of strong character and integrity. That I went out of my way to help people. When there was nothing in it for me, there was no accolade. Because I'm not looking for that. Anymore. Um, it's that my children would see me, love and care for their mother like I do. And not only do I serve her, but at times I serve them. I go out of my way to help my kids as well, and just a servant heart, um, in its simplest form. It's kind of like there's people that I've looked at and gone, wow, like was it Mother Teresa? Oh my gosh, here's a woman who went and just gave her whole life to serving poor people in India.
Right.
Just, I mean, it doesn't, you talk about somebody that's going to have a mansion in heaven.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, um, but um, I guess that, in its simplest form, that's what I look at. It's like I want to I want to serve.
Mm.
I want to serve. I want to continue to. I mean, somebody asked me one time, Ted, when are you going to retire? And I said, I've never found that word in the Bible.
You're right.
you know, I said, I might slow down a little bit. I said, but I am never going to stop sharing the gospel, and when necessary, use words.
Hmm.
I want to. Jesus said, "Let your light shine," and before men, and I think, and especially in these uh, hard times in our country, with so much, gosh, so much fighting and bickering, and a Democrat, a Republican, and people being accused of being bigots and racists and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
Now, more than anything, Christians have to let their light shine.
Hmm.
It's like the one of the most frightening scriptures in the Bible for me was, I think it's Matthew 7:21. Jesus said, "Just because you say to me, Lord, Lord, doesn't mean you'll enter the kingdom of heaven, but only those who do the will of my Father. Many will come in that day and say, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons and do many miracles?" And he's going to say to people that drove out demons that did miracles, I never knew you.
Whew, that's sobering.
It's sobering, because it goes to the depth of, it's like, you may have done that. You may have done it in my name, but you were still you were looking for the credit. You were looking for the accolade.
Mm.
It ain't about you,
Wow.
and it's that's where I want to try to keep my focus at a place, and my wife, Melanie Melanie's a caregiver. And I mean, to the point sometimes where, um, sometimes it makes me angry because I sometimes I think I see people taking taking advantage of her, you know, of her kindness.
Mm.
And when God tapped me on the shoulder after I had that thought, and said, "Well, why do you do that? Don't let people take advantage of you." And God said, "What's it to you?
Ouch.
What's it to you if she wants to give of herself like that? Maybe you should be a little bit more like her." Wow, that hit me right between the eyes.
Mm.
And so, that's where I'm at. I'm like, Lord, keep me humble.
That's good.
Keep me
Thank you.
humble.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's a great way to just kind of capture this whole thing we're talking about here with you is that legacy when we personalize it. And I think everybody should take time to personalize whether they're trying to be a living legend or they're trying to leave a lasting legacy. I think everybody should take away a lot from that statement there. But just thank you, Ted, for your time and life. You're so far from the arrogant villain of the $1 million man that and also want to give a shout out to our common friend Pastor Kelly Lorkey,
Absolutely.
who's spoken at that church as well, and they're great people. He's a good friend of mine as well, who's a good friend of yours as well.
Yeah.
So we're just glad to be surrounded by such precious people, especially like you said, in these times. It's just good to have the right people in your corner. So
Amen.
thank you again for your time and your humility and your story. For the cross-eyed culture and those who are listening, pass this on to friends. Let them know about what God is doing through Ted DiBiase's life. And the Heart of David is the name of the organization.
Heart of David Ministry.
Definitely check that out, guys, and see what you can do. Bring them out to some ministry times, especially as times lift. People need to hear his story and hear that message. Thank you again.
Thank you, Pastor. God bless you.